Welcome to Lesson 23, video number 1. In Lessons 23 and 24, we are dealing with absolute and relative change. So being able to make comparisons from data using these terms. So the first thing we want to do here on page 203 is talk about the difference between absolute and relative change. They're both fairly easy to calculate, but if you don't know the difference between them, they can be a little bit difficult to find. So we want to first start with what you're looking for. So when we talk about absolute change is a number. So the difference, let's talk about paychecks. The difference in the paycheck from the first day I started working to now is $50. It's a $50 increase from when I started to where I am now. That's absolute. It's a number. Whereas relative, we usually talk about in terms of a percent. So my paychecks have increased 42%. So it's more of, it's a percentage. It's based off of what you started with instead of a number, which gives you exactly what the change was. So the big difference is number and percentage. So when you talk about absolute, here in this little box, new value minus the old value. So I always just write n minus o. And when you think about the new value is most recent. What is happening most recently, that is new. Old, what's happened first, that's old. So on page 203, let's get into talking about this table. So notice how here, looking at this graphic, we've got to estimate. So the numbers that I'm going to use are estimates, and if you think about using something a little bit differently, that's fine, because using a graph is estimation. So number one, what is the absolute change in median home sale prices from 09 to 12? Well, when I think about this, 2012 would be new, and 2009 would be old, because 2012 is more recent. So when I go back to this, okay, here's 2012. This is my new value, so I'm going to say my new value is 118,000. Here's 2009, so I'm going to say my old value is 110,000. And I'm saying thousand because it tells you the median home sale price is in thousands. So when I go back to this, new minus old, I'm going to take 118 minus 110 and get 8,000. Right? And it's actually, I think, at $8,000 and that is absolute. It's a number. So now, is this positive or negative? Well, it's pretty easy to see that 118 minus 110 is a positive number. So if you have a positive number, positive means we have an increase. And that should make sense. If something is positive, it's going up. If you have a negative change, then you have a decrease. Okay, I would like you to do numbers 3 and 4 only. So hit pause, do 3 and 4. All right, in number 3, the biggest thing is to identify your old and new. So, 2009 is most recent, so that's new, and that's 110. 05 was the longest ago, so it's 116. So when I take new minus old, I get 110 minus 116, which is a negative 6,000. And then in number 4, from 11 to 12, 12 is most recent, so it's new. So I would take 118, right, because new minus old. 118 minus 113 gives me a positive 5,000. So in number 3, we have a decrease, and in number 4, we have an increase. And if you go back to the table, notice this, from 2009 to 2012, you see the increase. And from 2005 to 2009, you see the decrease. So that should make sense when you think about a positive and then the negative, just by looking at it. Number 5, I think, is kind of a tough question because the unit of measure really depends on the question. This particular unit of measure, we're talking about money because it's the sales price of a house. We could be talking about the number of potatoes in a field. We could be talking about anything. So the unit of measure is actually whatever we're talking about. But the big thing to remember with absolute change is it has to be a number. So, okay, let's turn the page and let's go to page 204, which is relative change. Now, remember, relative change is dealing with percentages. Most often is how we discuss it. And when you look in this table, you will see new minus old divided by old. And remember, when you calculate this ratio, if you divide, you're going to get a decimal. If we then need to change that decimal to a percent. So let's go ahead and do number 6, the relative change from '09 to 2012. So remember, '09 is old, and that was 110. So that was '09. 2012 is my new value, and it's 118. So when I go to calculate this, I want new minus old over old. So 118 minus 110 over 110. Order of operation tells me to do the top first, so I get 8 over 110. Notice it's positive. This gives me the decimal point 0727, and I'm going to go ahead and estimate this to be 7.3%. Right? Remember, decimal to a percent, I move it over 2 places. And then if I want it to the nearest tenth, if I look at that 7 rounds up, so that's how I get the 7.3%. Now it's positive, so how do we interpret this change? If it's positive, that means we have an increase. So I'm going to go ahead and type my answer so it's prettier. So the positive tells us there's an increase. So there was a 7.3% increase in median home sale prices from 2009 to 2012. Make sure you're specific. What are we talking about? What are my dates? Don't just say there was a 7.3% increase. When? Why? What? Make sure you give details when you interpret your changes or you give your meaningful sentences. All right, I would like you to hit pause and go ahead and try 8 and 9 on your own. I'm not sure if I hit pause or not when I started writing. I apologize if I didn't. But anyway, I do recommend the n minus o over o, writing that down every time, because that re-emphasizes the formula of new minus old divided by old. So I plugged in my '09 for new, my '05 for the old, and I ended up with negative 5.2%. So it's negative because we have the decrease. So what does that look like with your meaningful sentence? And of course your words don't have to be identical to mine, but it's going to be important that they are at least giving the same message. So there was a 5.2% decrease in median home sales prices from 2005 to 2009. Notice that I don't need to put a negative in front of this in my sentence because I use the word decrease. When you throw that word decrease in there, that lets you know that you have a negative percentage. All right, let's go to number 10. According to the Indiana Association of Realtors, at $118,000 last year, the state's median sales price for existing homes was 4% higher than in 2011. Does the graphic look like a 4% increase from 11 to 12? Well, let's go back to our graphic. From 11 to 12. So that's looking from here to here. Does this difference here look like 4%? And I'm going to go with a big old no. I mean, if you think about how much the difference, it looks like it's a third. I mean, it looks like 33% more in my opinion. So that's really hard to put my head around of how different it looks. But I want to draw one thing before I go back to the problem. Notice how our vertical axis starts at 104. It does not start at 0. So our graph is a little bit it's not accurate when it comes to the bar. The data is accurate, but in terms of being able to visualize, that part is not accurate because we do not start at 0. So that's something to make sure you're paying attention to, is how graphs can be misleading. So let's go back to that question. So I said no. And you obviously would want to give more of a reason of why. And there could be a lot of reasons of why it doesn't look like 4%. You've got to use what works for you. So we want to find the relative change from 11 to 12. So remember that 12 had a value of 118 and 11 had a value of 113. So here's my new, here's my old. And I'm looking for new minus old divided by old. So 118 minus 113 over 113. That's 5 over 113. And that becomes 0.044, which is 4.4%. So it is, 4% increase. It's kind of crazy that it doesn't look like it, but it really is. And now, I'm sorry, I kind of rolled over into number 11, but the unit of measure we're talking about is percents for relative change. Your relative change, whether it's an increase or a decrease, is always going to be percentages. All right, let's turn over to page 205. I'm going to do 2007 with you or for you. And then I would like you to fill out the rest of the table. So when you're trying to find the annual percent change, so notice here, they do not say find the relative change. They tell you to find the percent change. And that's the same thing. So when they say percent change, they're not indicating if it's going to be positive or negative. Obviously, it's going to depend on your data, and you can go from there. So when I'm looking to go from 2007, I want to find this value here in 2007. So 2007 would be new, and 2006 would be old. Now, you can tell from 2006 to 2007, my value went down, so my percent change should be negative. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, new minus the old divided by the old, 86,142. And when I calculate that, I end up with negative 7.7%. Okay, and now I'm going to have you do the rest, but just for clarification purposes, remember when you go to 2008, 2008 is now new and 2007 is old. So those values are going to move over every time. So hit pause, finish the rest of this table, then come back and check your answers. All right, so I wrote them in different colors so hopefully you can see. So you notice you have negatives. 2007, 8, 9, and 10 are all negative, and then in 11 and 12, you can see that the prices are now on an increase, so we're positive. If you have questions on how I got any of those, please let me know. Shoot me an email, and I will give you more work drawing that out. But using the percent change formula, remember always new minus old divided by old, change that decimal to a percent, and that's how I found those values. So there's a nice typo. When was there the largest positive change? So looking at our table here in page 205, the largest positive change came 2012. So that means from 2011 to 2012. So 2011 to 2012, we had the largest positive change. What about negative? Well, here is the biggest negative, right? Negative 16.4. So that's from 2007 to 2008. So 07 to 08 is the largest change. Okay, and now it says use the annual percent change for 2012 in a meaningful sentence, and that, if you remember, was 14.7%. And that was from 11 to 12. So let's chuck that into a sentence. Notice an important piece in this. So I use my percent increase. This is the title of my graph, existing home sales. These are the years that I talked about. And where are we at, right? It specifically says Indiana, so make sure you put in the state in which you are in, because that's important. All right, let's go ahead and go to page 206. This is a lot of data. So notice that now we're talking about the fair market rental rates in Indiana from 03 to 13, and we've got a bunch of different cities. So when you're using data like this, and you can find a lot of things, make sure you're paying attention to what they're asking. Are they asking for what year and which city? So be careful of that and pay attention to your data. So we are going to work on the bottom of page 206 in terms of the city. So I'm going to do Fort Wayne with you. And then I'm going to ask you to work through the rest of the cities. So if you look at Fort Wayne, it's on the top. And a big thing is they're asking you from 03 to 13. So 03 would be old and 13 would be new. So for Fort Wayne, right, if we're looking for absolute change, we want to find new minus old. So 2013 for Fort Wayne is 646. Old for Fort Wayne is 2003 is 542. So when I subtract those, my absolute change is a positive 104. All right. So now moving on to the relative change. Remember, relative change is new minus old divided by old. So we've already found the numerator. The numerator is 104 because that's new minus old. We are now going to divide that by the old, which is 542. And we get, I'm going to go right to a percent, 19.2%. And it should make sense that if your absolute change is positive, your relative change should be positive. So I'm going to ask you now to go ahead and go through, finish out this table using the data above. All right, check your answers. I tried to, move them left to right so you could kind of see them a little more clearly than if I just wrote them on top of each other. And again, if you have questions on how I got any of these, please shoot me an email and I will send you additional work. In number 12, or excuse me, I'm now on slide 12. Page 107 at the top, meaningful sentence. So when we look at Fort Wayne, they have them there. There was a $104 increase. FMR stands for Fair Market Rental Rates in Fort Wayne from 2003 to 13. So go ahead and hit pause, write sentences for Indianapolis based off of what you see in the Fort Wayne sentences, because being able to interpret and writing sentences about your information is very important. So hit pause and try that now. All right, so you can see what I did there, and I abbreviated a lot because I wanted my typing to fit in one line. So for the absolute change, notice we use the $177, and for the relative change, we use the 30.1%. So it's important that you know this. You know, absolute change is always the number, relative change is always the percent. And now let's go to page, or excuse me, we're still on page 207, but now this is the part that I really like. You know, when you're looking at years, it's very easy of new and old, right? The new is the most recent year, the old is the older year. But when you get to cities, I'm going from Kokomo to Evansville. Well, how do you know what's new and old? They're both cities. So when you think about new and you're traveling, where are you going or where are you ending up? That's new. Where are you most recently been? That's new. Where did you come from or where did you start? That's old. So when you think about it in terms of this table, the from is the old, the to is the new, because the to is where you're going, right? That's the in the future. It's where you're going to be. That's new. So that's how we've got these numbers, and I believe it does say use 2013 results. So when you go back to the table, this table, we are using 2013 for this. So that's where these numbers are coming from. So if you see in the top one, Evansville and Kokomo, new is Evansville. So that's where the 754 comes from. So this is Evansville, this is Kokomo, and we end up with a positive change. Okay, well, we're going to do the first one together. So this time, Kokomo is new and Evansville is old. So remember, absolute change is new minus old. So I'm going to take Kokomo now, and Kokomo is 654. Minus Evansville, which is 754, and my absolute change is now negative 100. Okay, so when I go to find my relative change, negative 100, remember I'm dividing by the old, and this time the old is Evansville. So the old is 754. So when I take negative 100, make sure you have the negative, divided by 754. I'm going to go straight to percentages, and I get negative 13.3%. Now, you'll notice in the absolute changes, Kokomo to Evansville, Evansville to Kokomo, the only difference is that this one is negative and this one is positive, because they're absolute, they're numbers. Now, but when you look at the relative change, we're at 15.3 and negative 13.3. Why the difference? Why isn't just one of them negative? Let you think about that for a second. Think. Look at our problems. What are we dividing by in these problems? Because you're always dividing by the old value, your old value is going to change depending on where you start. So because our old value changes, that is why our percentages are different. So it's just something to think about. So I'd like you to go ahead and hit pause, finish this table, and write your sentences in terms of what they're asking for down at the bottom. And then come back and check your answers. All right, so you can see my sentences as well as my statements. Let me know if those make sense. Again, for my absolute change, I always use new minus old, and for my relative change, new minus old, all of that over the old. So make sure you're using the right numbers in the correct order. When you're using a table like this, remember where you started is always old, where you end is the new. And pay attention when you're writing your sentences where you're starting and where you're ending. So let me know if you have any questions, and that is video number 1.